Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
UFOs, a Flying Saucers Part 2. Contact Report 134.
Yes, I have often explained that people and animals will take severe damage if they come within range of the swinging waves of your ship, and that they will also take severe damage if you come into the swinging wave area of the Earth humans.
Contact Report 139. Note: this excerpt concerns the first appearance of what has become known as the wedding cake ship.
You have actually come with your new box. It looks quite impressive. What technical innovations does it have to exhibit?
You are rather disrespectful in reference to our technology. I am proud of this flying apparatus. With its new drive, which I will explain a little to you later, I have better possibilities than Father with his great spacer. Also, with this device, it is possible for me to dive directly into the past or future, but also to penetrate into other dimensions. The flight from my home world to Earth is reduced with this new aircraft to 0 time, which I will also explain to you at a later time.
And is this now a standard type?
This aircraft is still a prototype, at least still for a week. After that, 350 units of the same kind will have already been supplied. This type of aircraft will gradually replace all other existing types of devices, thus it will become the standard type, as you said. In addition, the diameter amounts to 7 meters in size, like the existing aircraft of this type. What can also be mentioned even further is that the next 3 size classes of our present aircraft will also be replaced by this type, but they will differ in their sizes, which explains itself. They will include the sizes of 14, 21, and 28 meters, which will increase directly with planetary interests.
Contact Report 145.
You are a little careless, Quetzal. From the parking lot up there, one can see that it is your ship down here at the edge of the forest. Especially the light is clearly visible.
Besides Ava, no one is there, and should some stranger approach, then I will find out early enough.
Of course, but you opened the sound-absorbing shield too early. I just heard the rather loud buzzing.
Contact Report 147.
In addition, all our new ships have been withdrawn. This for technical reasons. The outer materials of the ships are not resistant enough against the highly poisoned earthly atmosphere. They become attacked and corroded. The Earth's atmosphere has further poisoned itself during the last months to such an extent that our relevant materials no longer withstand these metal-attacking poisons, which is why we must withdraw all units and exchange them.
And the old ships are able to endure the present atmosphere?
Yes, that is so.
But can you not protect your new ships against these poisonous effects?
Unfortunately, no, because the acidic gas formations in the terrestrial atmosphere penetrate through our protective screens.
Contact Report 148.
The last aircraft, which you call wedding cake ships, and which actually do show a resemblance to such sweet food of the Earth, were made out of a special alloy which was adapted to the Earth's atmosphere most exactly and which could only move in this one. Through the atmospheric changes, however, they slowly became destroyed and unusable.
Contact Report 150.
Then another question. Take a look in my office. There is a drawing by Lee Elders on the little brown table. He drew me a boomerang-like ship of unknown origin. Such ships are said to have been sighted several times in America recently and in the past few months, and they are said to be completely black in color and to have huge spotlights in operation at night. Is this known to you? And if so, what explanations can you give me in this regard?
I see the paper you mentioned here in my view screen, and I can also explain some things to you about it. The drawing is incorrect because these flying apparatuses are much less wedge-shaped than the drawing shows. So the wing-like side bodies are further apart. The size of the devices varies from a few meters to several hundred meters. The building material is of an extremely hard and resistant material, unlike our materials which are of a soft form. These flying apparatuses are also, as you mentioned, for the most part black, but they also have various other colors, which, however, have apparently not been observed and which are usually also drowned out by the black. Unfortunately, we cannot clarify the origin of these flying apparatuses, which we have been observing and controlling for 11 years, because there is no possibility that we can get in touch with the occupants of the apparatuses. The flying apparatuses are constructed in such a way that all our attempts at communication have failed, because our swinging waves and vibrations and all other kinds of like are absorbed by the outer shells of the apparatuses. No radio wave and no other swinging wave can penetrate into the interior of the flying apparatus, because the outer shell of each apparatus absorbs everything in the sense of storing energy for the ship's propulsion and everything else. This means, among other things, that these flying apparatuses are constructed in such a way that they absorb all waves of all frequencies, and thus all swinging waves of all kinds, as well as sunlight and all the radiation that appears with it, etc., for the storage of force. But also the moonlight and the weak light of the stars are absorbed and stored as force, together with many other things which are still unknown even to earthly scientists. What is certain, however, is that the life forms dominating these flying apparatuses are humane and reveal no hostility whatsoever, as has been impeccably proven by our 11 years of observation and control.
For my part, I find, for example, that a car alone would have to be tested and checked from AZ at least every 14 days if it is used very frequently.
Your assumption corresponds to the correctness in every point, also with the checking of the vehicles, because they would have to be subjected to a thorough check after any prolonged use, even if they were only used for 1 or 2 weeks. That is also how it is handled with our flying apparatuses and other means of transportation, although we are, in technical terms, around 3,500 years ahead of terrestrial, still quite primitive technology. Experience has taught us and our ancestors that such and also very precise controls are necessary after any prolonged use. And since this rule became valid for us, there were never any more accidents, neither in air, at sea, on land, or in space, except when any security measures were ignored, which led the way to technical failure of the transportation devices, or when it came to foreign influences, of which the human skill and technology had not become masters. However, such accidents have occurred very rarely in the last 2,000 years or so, whereby, up to the present hour, their number only amounts to 16.
Contact Report 153.
The computer will not be in this room because it is a device designed by me, which is to be installed in the telemeter disc located high above the center. In the aforementioned room, there will only be earthly apparatuses and equipment, which will transmit the voices of the group members to the computer, and which, in turn, will also let the voice of the computer in space become audible. It is also necessary that this apparatus hovers very high above the Earth, because it will not have certain data stored in it, which must then be retrieved from the central computer in the station.
Contact Report 157.
Your bucket there, your protective device, it is not as bulky as the one that you recently had with you. Is this a new development again?
That is of correctness. Today, I have this device here in operation for the first time.
Then you are just counting on the fact that it functions?
I can rely on it like you do with the dematerialization shafts of our ships, when you simply jump into them from impossible heights, in order to materialize on the Earth again several kilometers below the hovering ship, something that we would never do.
A little timid, perhaps?
Our dematerialization machinery works absolutely flawlessly, so we also do not have to fear. If we use this ourselves, however, then the security hatch is always closed, so we cannot even see out. You, however, jump in each case when the hatch is open, and you look down for kilometers beneath you, into the yawning depths to the ground.
Contact Report 163.
Good. Then I have a question regarding so-called UFOs, which are truly none at all. As I know from you, the so-called flying objects that are considered UFOs are often observed in the day, as well as at night. At night, it is often observed that these so-called UFOs light up and are vibrant in their intensity, and also variable in color. On the one hand, you were able to make it understandable to me, with tangible evidence and through my personal observations, that these sometimes deal with bioorganic flying bodies, sea rods, that are truly other-dimensioned life forms that, as a rule, can be captured on infrared film and that penetrate from other dimensions into our dimension area in order to romp around here somehow in earthly airspace for playful and whimsical reasons. You also explained to me that these bioorganisms are completely harmless and that they always return back to their dimension. But on the other hand, you have also spoken of the fact that similar phenomena appear in terrestrial airspace, but these are purely terrestrial in origin. At that time, you spoke of the fact that it can also concern huge swarms of insects that let themselves drift through the air at great heights. During the day, these insect swarms can be seen as dark and form-changing UFOs that often even glow. At night, the same can be observed, and these UFOs then glow from weak to very strong and often even pulsate. Those are the two forms of UFOs best known to me, which are truly not extraterrestrial ships and which are composed of living forms. Although you have explained that other such forms exist, about which you have told me some things, but today I am mainly interested in the apparent UFOs, which consist of insect swarms. I would like to know a few things about this from you, if you have enough time to give me information about it.
As a rule, it concerns masses of insect swarms, which must be calculated with millions of individual insects. These insects can be driven in gigantic swarms to high altitudes, which are often kilometers high, where they are able to exist in the thin atmosphere with astonishing ease, and often let themselves drift through the air currents for hundreds and thousands of kilometers. The size, shape, and movement of these insect swarms appear on radar screens as simulated flying objects, as also observers mistakenly suppose that these are unidentified flying objects. Then, these inaccurate observations, as well as the deceptive pictures of the radar devices, always lead to the fact that such insect swarms are designated as UFOs with astonishing regularity. Especially when such swarms of insects are observed at night, it is seen that these unidentified flying objects appear as illuminated bodies that either shine faintly or very strongly, and that often pulsate. As I know, such light is usually described by the observers as a glow. Thousands of these swaying insects, united in one swarm, can muster up a light intensity that can be seen for kilometers. But if the swarms of insects are even larger, if several tens of thousands or even millions unite, then the light creation of this mass is so strong that it can be observed by the naked eye up to 180 kilometers away, and more as a strong light source flying at a very high speed, while performing aerial maneuvers that cannot be executed by any earthly aircraft. forward and reverse flights at extremely rapid speeds, as well as zigzag flight maneuvers and right-angled as well as left-angled flight maneuvers, and vertical drops and climbs are the norm, depending on the falling winds and rising winds and other various air currents prevailing at these great heights, which often cause the insect swarms, when these drift into them, to be driven off at right or left angles, etc., or driven back again with a counter current of wind. These are the so-called wild or completely crazy flight maneuvers of these alleged UFOs, as the observers then report. But such observations do actually look deceivingly real, according to which it could and can actually be concluded that these are some extraterrestrial flying objects, if the observations are made by observers who are uneducated in these things or by prejudiced UFO believers. Nevertheless, many who have more experience in this area can also be deceived by these insects, as you know. But now, concerning the origin of the lights and the pulsation of these insect swarms, the following is to be explained. Like on every planet in the universe, the Earth's atmosphere is permeated by a variety of weaker and stronger electric fields, which also differ in their swinging waves. The higher into the atmosphere these penetrate, the richer in occurrence these electric force fields become, which very often move along for many hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Now, if the high-flying insect swarms drift into such electric force fields, which also usually move with the air currents, then the insects start to light up, which appears as a glowing. Because the swarms are, on the one hand, steady in their movement, and, on the other hand, the electric energy fields waver in their strength, there arises a swelling or dwindling of the glow or radiance, because the weaker the energy field is, the weaker is the radiance. However, the radiance also loses its strength through the constant turning motions of the insects themselves. From this originates the so-called pulsating of these allegedly unidentified flying objects. On the other hand, the color changes connected with such alleged objects appear because the strength of the electric energy fields lets the radiance or the glow become more intense or weaker, in which case also the air shifts and the trembling and flickering of the air form color-changing factors. So it can be observed, for example, that a white color of light suddenly becomes red, blue or green, or even yellow, weak or intense. But the fact that this radiance or glow can appear at all is because the insects have substances on their bodies and wings that begin to glow or light up as soon as they come in contact with electric currents, which is indeed the case when they drift into electric fields at high altitudes or even near the ground. Furthermore, there are also types of insect swarms that soar through the atmosphere, which have their own luminosity and, thus, generate a light or glow in themselves.
I know. There are species of cicadas on the Earth that produce their own lights in their bodies. Also, the little glowworms known in Europe belong to these self-illuminating ones, if I may unprofessionally say so.
That is of correctness.
The so-called marine lights are also based on the same principle. Through you, I know that the marine lights were often seen by the seafarers as sea monsters and terrifying figures, etc., especially when the sea was moving a little and thereby moved the marine lights more than what is normally the case. But in modern times, it is only rare that this light appearing on the sea is referred to as a monster, etc., because today the UFO craze prevails, which is why the marine lights are always seen nowadays as UFOs that still perform incredible flight maneuvers. But in truth, it is also the case that these marine lights are caused by types of insects. However, these do not fly through the air and also do not live on land. Rather, their area of life is the seawater or freshwater, depending on the type. Thus, these are the luminous little worms of the seas or lakes, pools or ponds, etc. But furthermore, from personal experience, I still know of alleged UFOs that are neither insects nor other life forms, but rather self-luminous energy fields that form damn similar manifestations as the flying insects, etc., when they are driven through the atmosphere by the air currents. As you once explained to me, these are static energy fields that dissolve in this way of glowing. But then, I still know the manifestations of static energy forms that rush like wheels or balls along the ground or through the air, which suddenly explode like balls of lightning. Last to mention are the gas forms that sometimes form quite bizarre figures, or that are simply round and that brightly hover just above the ground. But so far, I could only observe these in the moor areas and swamps, etc., which is certainly also logical because they originate from the fact that in the swamps and moors, luminous gases form, caused by putrefaction processes and other chemical conversion processes, and these then retreat upwards, rising high over the swamp or over the moor, and then appearing as hovering bright lights. With us, we simply call these things crazy lights. But unfortunately, it is also the case that in the present time, observers of such things always want to see UFOs, in contrast to earlier times when such apparitions were conjured through the popular delusion as devils and demons. Tell me rather something more about the insect swarms. Why actually do they fly through the air in this type and wise?
The insects have a very peculiar urge, namely that regardless of their natural desire for food, nesting places, etc., they are simply driven at times, as if by compulsion, to fly high up into the sky. Their entire inner being is still only dominated by this urge, by which they also completely lose any interest in food and in the opposite sex. The reason why the only goal of these insects is to rise high into the air spaces, where they can let themselves be driven by the winds, often to very distant goals, is that by natural laws they are incited to change their habitat in order to preserve their kind. If the insects would stay in their old habitat for a longer time, then it would mean extinction for them. Nevertheless, their natural instinct warns them of this, and therefore, if they start to feel that their present habitat is becoming dangerous for them and that simply an overpopulation of their kind is taking place, then there arises in them the peculiar urge to master the beginning goal, which is to let themselves rise high into the air or be driven away by the wind, by the thousands and millions, after which they are then driven as gigantic swarms by the prevailing winds to their new habitat.
In America, these swarms are often observed in enormous numbers, in contrast to Europe. Are there more such kinds of insects that move over the country in large swarms? And what is the main kind?
Yes, these insects appear there more, namely far to the north into Canada and down to the deepest south into Tierra del Fuego, which, like Canada, no longer belongs to America. The currently best-known kind is the so-called spruce budworm. The technical Latin term for it is Coristonura fumiferana. The only reason why the spruce budworm is best known is because presently and in recent years, it can be observed the most often, for there are still many other kinds of these insects that float so high up through the air. Approximately calculated, there are 25,000 species, including dragonflies, spiders, grasshoppers, flies, wasps, bees, ants, termites, beetles, and bugs of all kinds, etc. It is also very interesting to know that very many flightless insects let themselves float high in the atmosphere by the winds, such as which can be found very often in large clusters, and which, like all other insects, also let themselves drift along at altitudes between 2,000 and 5,000 meters. On warm spring days, for example, hundreds and thousands of small spiders often clump together after hatching, and they would all have to starve miserably if they would be bound to their birthplace, where they would have to become bigger and grow up. But in order to escape this death, they climb up high, sharp blades of grass or tree branches, etc., and lift their hindquarters into the air. Then, when wind arises, these tiny and almost 1 millimeter long arachnids spin a silk thread that is 1,000 times thinner than the thickness of a human hair. This silk thread, however, which is woven into the blowing wind, is taken by the wind and carried high up into the atmosphere, while at the end of the thread hangs the tiny spider, which can be carried so high into the air and also hundreds and thousands of kilometers away to a new home. This, then, is also the reason why at great heights, earthly aircraft are often covered with a coating of the finest transparent silk when they fly through a swarm of the tiniest spiders, which are to be calculated in their number with hundreds of thousands or millions. In this wonderful manner of using air to overcome distances, the insects very often reach very distant areas in order to find a new habitat, which they could otherwise never reach by their own means of going and flying, whereby their species would become destroyed and extinct. In the case of a proliferation of insects at a place, the surplus can migrate and set off into other areas that are suitable for them by the winds, which is often observed by the earth humans, especially at night, after which they then incorrectly suppose or simply believe that they are extraterrestrial missiles and, thus, UFOs. What is still to be said is that even seeds and pollen of floral areas likewise move through the air, often thousands of kilometers away, in order to fertilize their own kind through wind pollination. And all such drifting pollen, which lets itself be carried away high into the air by the winds, can bear the often stark climate changes as easily as also the insects. All these insects and the pollen, however, are absolutely dependent on the prevailing wind currents for their transportation around the globe, by which they are carried into their new homeland. Thus, they cannot determine their flight direction themselves because they do not go against the forces of the winds, which is why they must simply let themselves drift along in these.
It strikes me that you have also mentioned the pollen. Apparently, so I infer from this, it must also appear to human beings as UFOs when it drifts into electrical fields.
That is of correctness, because the same process also takes place with pollen when the clusters are dense enough. But the same also happens with sandstorms and the like when enormous amounts of dust, etc., are torn high into the atmosphere and then transported. All of this can be observed not only at night but also during the day.
Contact Report 184.
High in the eastern sky, I noticed a bright light at 2014 HRs, about 4 to 5 times as large as Venus. At first, I thought of the evening star, thus Venus, before it dawned on me that Venus is only visible to us in the southern and western hemisphere. Then, I looked at the bright light a little more closely, and I noticed that it was located in strange shifts of color, which permeated all the colors of the rainbow spectrum, and changes in form also arose. Consequently, I hurried into my office and grabbed my binoculars, through which I could then largely account for and observe the strange light formation in the sky, which was about 1 meter in size. To me, it seemed to be like a Fata Morgana, whose form changed constantly, and it also seemed to be somewhat transparent, so just like with a Fata Morgana. I estimated the altitude of the object to be about 35,000 meters, and that it was at a distance of about 18 to 20 kilometers away from our vantage point. What I still assessed during the observation was that on the right side, various small objects separated themselves from the large object and flew away. Moreover, I also saw that on the large object itself, there were several dark points and spots, as well as outgrowths and the like. I already saw something similar on the Great Spacer of Ptah, which is why I was of the opinion that it had to have been a spaceship, but which one only saw as a Fata Morgana or just simply as a reflection. I interpreted the flying away, glittering points to the right of the object to be beamships, while I supposed that the dark points and spots as well as the outgrowths, had to be hangars and such, similar to the superstructures on Ptah's ship. Now, if I consider the size of the light of the object together with its distance, then I calculate that the ship's size must have been around 320 to 340 meters in diameter.
The object sighted by you actually is a spaceship, but which you were only able to see as a reflection, even while the ship hovered directly over your center in order to investigate the place and those humans who are, for us, the most significant mission-engaged ones on the Earth. For security reasons, which were made known to you by us, the flying apparatus was shielded from view, and it creates a form of reflection that is completely alien to our technology, which becomes visible in the atmosphere many kilometers away. Other human beings do not just have the same technology as we ourselves, which is well known to you. Thus, the Druans, with regard to screening technology, have completely different forms than what we possess. The flying apparatus is a spaceship from the planet Druan, whose human life forms we therefore call the Druan. They are a very widely developed and extremely peaceful human race that can bring some innovations to our own technology. The planet Druan lies in the NOL system, which belongs to a galaxy whose size is about 1.7 times larger than ours, and this galaxy is located 3.10 million light years away from the SOL system. The Druans are on an expedition here on Earth for at least 5 to 6 months, but in accordance with our experience, it could more likely last for years. During this time, their spaceship and their accompanying missiles can very often be seen by the Earth humans, but initially and during the first weeks, this was only in Europe. After that, the Druan ships could then also be sighted over other continents of the Earth. So if the Earth humans keep their eyes open, then they will very often be able to observe the flying apparatus.
This will probably result in particularly sly and scientifically super clever explanations, such as balloons, etc. What does the object actually look like, if one disregards the distorted reflection?
Just like a discus-shaped object, although a completely different form is reflected outwardly by a special shield, which can be compared to the cone and facets of a rock crystal.
Does this then also appropriately give off all the colors of the spectrum?
You apparently are not ignorant of such things.
Contact Report 213.
At that same time, when Emmanuel was born, in order to monitor and supervise everything, a large Pleiaren beam ship was stationed high in the atmosphere over Bethlehem. This radiated very brightly, for it was one of those aircraft that collect energy from the atmosphere, which light up, radiating very strongly, when they penetrate into the area of the processing system, through which anti-gravity is produced.
Contact Report 216.
Simyase once explained to me, in response to one of my questions, that antimatter is real, and that this was already discovered by your ancestors more than 50,000 years ago, and has been used by you since that time as beamship propulsion. Since then, have you researched and developed new techniques for this?
Of course, negative matter, as we call antimatter, has already been used by us for 50 millennia for all sorts of purposes. And of course, also much other research was connected with it and still is. Therefore, new insights will also constantly be won and will create new ones with which negative matter is brought to application or is used.
Contact Report 217.
The human beings who walked the earth at earlier times, such as over 20 or 120 or even more than 230 million years ago, were in no wise the so-called earth-made or earth-created ones, but rather extraterrestrials who came from the depths of space and who stayed here for a certain time or only visited the planet for a short time for expeditions or for major excursions. At that time, the areas of origin and home worlds of these travelers from afar were to be found in your galaxy, so the Milky Way, but also in foreign galaxies.
Contact Report 218.
All of our flying devices are suited for diving processes, whereby, due to our pressure protection screens, there are no limits set for the depth. We will dive into the depths of the Atlantic as well as the Pacific.
Then Quetzal flies his beam ship back to Earth and over the Atlantic, to then descend into the depths of the sea. Then we hover over the spongy sea bottom, and Quetzal moves the beam ship, which indeed has now become a diving ship, slowly along. The beam ship glows externally in radiating brilliance and lights up the pitch-black darkness in a broad circumference. Over and over again, crazy ones appear, claiming that they have had contacts with you, or else with some extraterrestrials, and that they would have been promised that the extraterrestrials would bring salvation to the Earth and to the Earth humans. As a rule, these crazy ones who make such assertions are some sect bosses or delusional believers and lunatics of other natures, who lie their heads off and promise their believers and followers that the extraterrestrials will come with spaceships and save all of those, or at least a part of those, who believe in the hypocritical horror stories of the bringing of salvation through extraterrestrials, and will take them to a nicer, more peaceful, and better planet in safety. The crazy ones who invent and maintain such stories, partly due to pure addiction to profit, delusional faith, confusion, or madness, try to convey to their followers who are enslaved to them and to their believers that the extraterrestrials would allegedly take their own responsibility from them and send them rescue.
That is well known to us. All evil means are right to these liars, swindlers, and deceivers, in order to bind those who are enslaved to them and their believers to themselves. But the truth is that neither we nor any other earth foreigners exercise the role of the bringers of salvation. Neither we nor others bring teachings of salvation to the earth, and, thus, to the earth humans, for any teaching of salvation is of a religious and sectarian nature, and only serves to make those who believe therein dependent and enslaved, in order to subjugate them, to exploit them, and also to cause them to remain faithful to the relevant religion or sect. In addition, each teaching of salvation is designed to drive the believers and those who are enslaved into irrational teachings and into the mistaken belief that all their offenses, wrong lifestyles and injustices, as well as the harming of fellow human beings, can receive lenient treatment and can easily be forgotten, and thus they would be forgiven by the bringers of salvation. It is in the tricked believers and the enslaved that the responsibility for anything and everything would lie in a predetermination or present determination with the extraterrestrials or just with God the Creator, who should allegedly exist and who should determine and direct everything. Thus, the religious believers, sect believers, delusional believers, and others are forcefully kept by unfair, misguided elements, etc., through lies, swindle, and deception, from bearing and perceiving their own responsibility for anything and everything that always arises in life. The belief in salvation-bringing extraterrestrials, in any salvation-bringing teaching, or in a salvation-bringing God, who should also still be just, as well as full of love, understanding, and willingness to help, corresponds to the imagination of profit-minded human beings who, originally, had deliberately designed their created irrational teaching in order to gather believers and enslaved ones around themselves, whom they could exploit in every respect, in order to be able to lead lives of joy and glory through them. And since ancient times, there have always been enough fools who let others think for them instead of giving themselves the trouble of thinking, of reasoning, and of the pursuit of truth and the recognition of actuality and, thus, reality, for it was always easier for them to shift the responsibility for anything and everything onto others or onto extraterrestrials or simply onto a God creator. That is to say, a creator God, in order then to take the path of least resistance and the path of least effort, as well as the path of laziness. And there are still such human beings on the earth today, unfortunately still in large quantities. But if the earth human really wants to experience a salvation, then he or she must bring this to themselves in that they laboriously acquire it themselves. But this means that they must turn to the truth and reality, and must perceive their own responsibility in every respect, and must bear it and fulfill it. In this meaning, it is given to be recognized that neither extraterrestrials nor a God creator, neither a teaching of salvation, a religion or sect, nor any lunatic, spinner, delusional believer, godly one, enlightened one, guru, master, or exalted one by his own grace, etc. brings any salvation. Rather, only every single person can acquire this for themselves, in reference to their own personality, their conduct and their lifestyle, their behavior, their love, their inner and outer peace, their balance and harmony, their knowledge, their wisdom and evolution, and their entire progress in consciousness-related and material form. Sectarians are liars, swindlers, and cheats, who are only out to rally believers and enslaved ones around themselves, in order to exploit these and to be able to position themselves in the light and in the forefront, as self-appointed eminences and divinities of their own graces, or as representatives of a god, or any allegedly high and lofty, as well as all-knowing and powerful extraterrestrial, etc.
Contact Report 230.
Concerning particles, photons are after all light particles and must therefore also have a mass and a weight, because this is the only way spaceships with photon propulsion can function, right?
Of course, these also have a mass and a weight, but in a changing form. The present-day weight is 1.252 gram.
Then I would like to come back to our joint deep-sea trip. You told me after this fantastic trip that the spotlights that illuminated the deep-sea darkness for hundreds of meters around the ship corresponded to a very special kind, but you did not elaborate further on it. Can you at least explain it to me now?
The light beam device, that is to say, the spotlights. These are not several devices, but only a single one, comprising the entire beam ship, which can be used as a single light beam device on the outer hull. The light, however, is not in the usual form known to you, hence it does not emit rays of light in the usual sense. In fact, these are invisible light-swinging waves, which cannot be seen from outside the beam ship, so that the ship remains thus completely dark. The invisible light-swinging waves can only be perceived in the beam ship itself, namely through the walls. The outer environment is therefore not immersed in a visible wall of light, but only in certain swinging waves, which can be made visible to us in the beam ship by our special technology. So it seems as if outside everything would be bathed in the brightest visible light, while outside, however, there is complete darkness. Only in this way is it possible for us to observe the deep-sea life forms undisturbed. Since these are self-luminaries, as we call them, the visible light means danger for them, because the life forms hunt each other also in the deep sea and mean food for each other. Therefore, if the beam ship were to emit visible light from outside, all life forms would flee from it, making it impossible for us to observe them. The beam ship, if it were to emit rays of light visible from outside, would appear to the deep-sea life forms as an evil and all-devouring monster, which is why they would flee.
Very interesting. So then this light has also nothing to do with the light that you shield in the atmosphere.
That is of rightness.
Contact Report 234.
The memory elements of the control disk have not yet been viewed or checked by us.
Contact Report 235.
For quite some time now, the talk has been about UFO sightings and alleged encounters with extraterrestrial life forms again, with the human being of the Earth. Especially in Russia, a story about this had turned out to be a big one, namely in Voronezh, or what the name of the village should be. Recently, however, entire squadrons of UFOs have been ghosting through the polluted skies in Belgium as well, turning police officers into UFO persecutors. But also the population seems to be in love with the hype, as it is the case in England and several other countries on our planet. Can you tell me more about this?
Of course, but truthfully, it is hardly worthwhile to say a word about it. The occurrences are partly extraterrestrial, as in Voronezh, and partly also in Belgium. But there is also something quite earthly behind them. A certain amount of attention should be paid to the extraterrestrial origin of flying apparatuses. But it is not worth talking about it either. More attention should be paid to the fact that some phenomena are related to the USA and South America, where you made your own experiences when your life was threatened. But discussing these things would not be of an advantage, so it is not worth talking about them, for your own safety.
Well, that is well enough. So behind some of this there is also fraud and deception along with the truth. That is probably also the case here in Switzerland with the alleged UFO sightings in Ticino.
It is no different than in other countries. In fact, if one wanted to believe the UFO believers and UFO swindlers and similar swindlers and phantoms, then the Earth would be teeming with aircraft of extraterrestrial origin. With the SOL system, however, the Earth lies so far away in a galaxy arm of the Milky Way that it is considered an enclave and has only a sparse influx of other inhabited stars. It is simply not interesting enough to be visited by foreign life forms on a large scale. Truthfully, it is practically always the same visitors from the vastness of space who fly in and out of the Earth, as we do, for example. 2 to 3 times a year, perhaps strangers come to Earth.
Contact Report 236.
Your story was rather detailed and corresponds exactly to the records of the control disk.
Do you also know that Eva is in the office next door and is sleeping? Man, we have all holes open in the building and are merrily babbling here while she is over there. It just amazes me that so far you have not cracked up yet and are not acting crazy.
But fortunately, that is not of great importance, for our protective devices, such as this one here, have been so further developed in the meantime that they protect us for 92 minutes from any swinging wave that could be dangerous to us. So there is no danger in relation to this. But so that Eva does not wake up and does not come over here, I can do something. Just as my daughter placed your wife into a deep sleep before, I will do the same thing with Eva using this device here. So this touch here is sufficient. Now she will not be tempted to simply wake up and come here. Currently, on the Earth, a large-scale interest has awoken worldwide once again in reference to alleged sightings of unidentified flying objects that should be of extraterrestrial origin. For many months, major activities of unknown flying apparatuses have also been observed time and again all over the world, and in many cases, even entire groups of humans have become observers. But also in many cases, observations are reported where there were not actually any to report, not to mention the alleged personal encounters with extraterrestrial life forms that are supposed to have taken place. In fact, few extraterrestrial flying machines have been sighted by Earth humans, but this unfortunately does not mean that all sightings of unidentified flying objects were such objects. In truth, there were only a few whose sightings often were not even disclosed to the public. The rest of all the other objects sighted, which became designated and which are designated as UFOs, were and are of purely natural and terrestrial origin, having very natural causes. The fact that some charlatans, fun-makers, swindlers, and deceivers are involved in such works, who, through technological means, conjure phenomena or allow light flying machines to rise up into the atmosphere. In order to bring the Earth humans into turmoil or to move them into anxiety and terror, or simply to make fools of them through practical jokes, this should be clear even to the most naive of the naive. But whoever is UFO believing and wants to see ghosts, of course, sees them everywhere, so even where there are none. Also, frauds and charlatans arrive at their wealth in such a manner because they can live very well off of the idiots. This was and has been the case since ages ago. In addition, it must be said that a certain caution is also necessary with everything because not everything is simply hallucinations, sectarian insanity, charlatanism, and fraud. For flying machines also appear that are directed by Earth humans, who have created a massive base in the South American region and who are striving for world domination, as this is also very well known to you, but we should provide no further details about this. But in any case, there are utterly dark and bad terrestrial life forms, humans of this world who possess a high technology and corresponding flying apparatuses, in order to be able to cause disaster with these, if they could only do so and if they would not be prevented from such doings by certain circumstances. Nevertheless, like the Americans, Canadians, and Russians, they repeatedly move the Earth humans into fear and panic by demonstrating their aircraft in the day or night sky, when they are on a thief's tour or are otherwise flying through the air on some occasion that is often difficult to fathom.
Contact Report 237.
Last Monday evening, the 5th of November, something happened in Europe which caused the populations of various countries to revolt. It happened around the 7th hour of the evening that many people were watching a bright, fiery ball high in the sky, moving at breakneck speed from west to east or southeast, pulling a fiery tail behind it. Various observers also said that in addition to the large fireball, some smaller ones had also appeared. A pilot who was flying to Europe via Lithuania in northern Russia saw the phenomenon as well and drew the attention of his crew and passengers. Of course, among the observers, there were also madmen and phantoms who wanted to see everything possible and impossible in the tail fireball. According to the Belgium hysteria with the alleged triangular UFOs, many humans allegedly saw a huge triangular UFO high in the sky, orbited by several smaller triangular objects. One man in Germany even claimed that he had clearly seen an object that looked exactly like the spaceship Enterprise from the TV future series Enterprise. In Geneva, someone had just tested a new video camera in the western sky and recorded some of it on a magnetic tape, which was then shown on Swiss television. I then saw these pictures and realized that it must have been a bigger meteor that had dipped into the Earth's envelope in a flat trajectory and then glowed before hurtling back out into space again. This is because it has apparently slid through the uppermost layer of the Earth's atmosphere, such as, for example, a stone, which is thrown with great force flat on a water surface and glides over the water and strikes several times before it sinks into the water, just as it was done with the waterslide bombs in the last World War, because large, round and tons heavy explosive bombs were built, which were hurled flat from airplanes into the water of rivers and lakes, towards weirs and the like, so the deadly water-sliding projectiles skimmed like flat stones over the water, and often jumped many tens of meters before they reached their destination, exploded and tore the weirs, etc., to shreds. So it seemed to me to be similar to the object that was filmed. Now, however, so-called experts are again claiming that the whole thing was the crash of a Russian launcher. For my part, however, it seemed to me to be something else, a meteor, as I have already explained. With Quetzal, and also earlier with Simya-se, I could observe different launcher crashes and also 2 satellite crashes from close proximity and a distance. In addition, different meteor dips into the Earth's shell, including 4 such dips which only whizzed flatly through the outermost atmosphere and went out and disappeared again in the world space. And this is exactly how this object, which was shown on television, looked. It looked in no wise like rocket fragments.
The incident is known to me, and it was actually a meteorite with a diameter of 3.2 meters. We had been observing the trajectory of this meteor for many weeks and found that it would only graze the outermost layer of the Earth's envelope, as you say, and fly out into space again. It was a wandering meteorite of unknown origin, and not coming from the asteroid belt of the destroyed planet Malona. Hurrying through space since time unknown to us, on its path of origin, which was also unknown to us, it got into the area of attraction of the Earth and grazed the outer shell, causing it to glow and thus form a tail several kilometers long. By the immersion into the outermost envelope of the Earth, and by the resulting frictional heat, some striking formations of the meteorite were torn apart, altogether 14 of them, which burst off explosively from the main form and burned up as accompanying meteors next to the main block and flew beside it, in order to leave the Earth's envelope again, together with the large meteorite, in order to divide in free space. So it was not a crashing carrier rocket, as hasty ones or know-it-alls want to claim, but actually a big meteorite from space.
A space projectile from the vastness of the universe, if one may formulate it so.
Contact Report 238.
So I quickly went back into my flying apparatus and ordered the control element of the control disk to turn on, which I then promptly examined.
What energies did your ancestors or ancestral ancestors use after they departed from the rocket motors or rocket drives? I must ask, what kind of energies and engines did they use? Are you allowed to give any information at all?
If I answer your last question first, then the answer is yes, because here too there is no longer a secret on Earth, because we have been providing relevant scientists with corresponding impulses for quite some time. The answer to the questions of energies and engines is this: electron drives or electron pulse drives. The entire universal space is piled up through and through with electrons. So the space is not simply empty, as the layperson mistakenly thinks, but what is also known to earthly scientists for a very long time. However, electrons do not only exist in one kind or form, but in very diverse forms. However, I am not yet allowed to give further information or explain details about this, nor with regard to the 280 universally existing elements, of which only about 100 are known to Earth scientists. To answer your question, however, I would like to explain to you that our ancestors discovered the principle of electron energy, which is present on all planets and stars, as well as in all forms of life, as well as in inexhaustible form in the entire universe. We make use of these electron energies even today, just as our early and later ancestors did, only that we make energy transformations and are incomparably advanced in the use of these energies and their application, as well as in the technology required for them, than our ancestors were. Tachyon drives, as well as ray drives and antimatter drives, and our newest means of transportation with transmitters are based on electron energy, which we have been using for many millennia in ever more perfected form. Also, the cosmic electromagnetic life energy, from which any form of life lives, is a product of the never-exhaustible electron energy of the universe. Also, any form of existence, no matter what kind, lives from it, even the spirit forms, even if their energy is infinitely finer.
Are electrons also swinging waves?
That is right.
Aha, then an electron impulse engine should actually operate in such a manner that it finds a hold on the electrons in free space itself, at which it can repel itself and move by its own swinging waves. A perfect perpetual motion machine, so to speak, if one knows the technology and is able to apply it. This also explains why your spacecraft never lack energy, neither in free space nor on a planet. Also, it dawns on me slowly that you can regulate and apply the redirection of light to make your flying machines invisible, but probably also the phenomenon that you can also fly in an air envelope with unlimited speed without being fried by a friction heat. Because if you protect your ships or other flying bodies with electron-swinging waves, with an electron-swinging wave mantle, so to speak, then the slightest friction can no longer arise. Is that so, or am I right?
Once again, you made me ask you a question to give you a small statement with which you could continue working at lightning speed and give facts that I did not actually want to mention.
Contact Report 241.
Again, a question about the aliens. Apart from the fact that their objects can crash or have to go down on Earth by emergency landings, it is also given that their flying bodies are simply observed by Earth humans when they race through earthly air, isn't it?
Certainly this will remain so. Sightings of such flying machines of alien beings are still made, whereby it must be paid attention. However, that not all really observed or to be observed flying machines are really extraterrestrial origin, because certain powers on Earth also have flying bodies, which are generally regarded as unidentified flying objects, because their existence is kept secret and is largely unknown, which in no way means that all observations regarding such flying machines would point to earthly objects. Certain observations actually refer to aircraft of extraterrestrial or even alien origin. Note, here Ptah differentiates between extraterrestrial and alien.
This is clear to me, but not to other people, because they always turn everything in such a way that they can claim that they're real or self-deceptive or self-deceiving. Invented, lying, or simply charlatan-like fictional sightings of missiles of all kinds are UFOs, by which of course spaceships or jet ships, etc. are meant.
That is unfortunately correct. Many fantasts, liars, charlatans, swindlers, and so-called experts of ufology act in this form. Especially the so-called experts are usually unobjective, gullible, misbelieving, and unrealistic, which is why they are unobjective. Out of this, they recognize every obvious fraud as a real event, while they classify a given reality and true event as fraud, which is especially true for all well-known so-called ufologists. Not only are they biased and deny any real truth, because it does not fit into their concept, no, they also dare to denigrate and deny the truth in order to propagate all nonsense and nonsense as genuine and truthful. Nor do they shy away from interpreting all possible and impossible things, movements, noises, shadows, whisperings, imaginary touches and deceptions of all kinds as machinations of extraterrestrial intelligences and as they're manifesting themselves, which corresponds more than only to a ridiculousness, because all this is truthfully already based on a hopeless delusion. Of course, all this does not contribute in public to a reasonable and unbiased discussion, as well as to a pertinent assessment of the facts about alien aircraft and the actual existence of alien life and its sporadic presence and visits to Earth. All these stupid, dreamy, boastful elements contribute, in truth, to the fact that the actual existence of extraterrestrial flying machines and extraterrestrial human life is just as doubted and ridiculed as their actual appearance in terrestrial airspace and on Earth itself.
I know, but we shouldn't talk about it. Let's stay with the other thing you said. The fact is that many of the so-called ufologists and UFO experts, etc., through their fantasies and their unobjectivity, do more harm than good to all ufology and the truth about alien extraterrestrial missiles and their crews.
Contact Report 246.
And of course I brought you the metal samples. The multicolored metal is a still unfinished alloy, which, as with us, is also used by Ascot's people in the Dal universe as a thin coating for all types of flying objects and flying devices. The other and silver-shining metal is almost pure silver, which forms one of the basic materials for the alloy, which consists of two further parts of copper and nickel.
On a private basis, fraud, lies, charlatanry, and fraud have been practiced in these matters for a long time, which, according to your statements, should increase in the future. Unfortunately, this also discredits and ridicules the real UFO observations, if we want to stick to this name. But there are other UFO observations, namely those that fall within the scope of official and military secrets. This also involves various events of the past and present, about which a great deal has been written, claimed, talked about, and kept secret in the private sphere of so-called UFO research. Stories about crashes and salvages of UFOs also appear. For example, the case of New Mexico towards the end of the 1940s, etc. But also names like Falcon and Condor, etc. play an important role, whereby it should concern CIA members, etc., who should pass on UFO information to the public under these pseudonyms, of course, without letting their face become recognizable. Also, the so-called Little Greys play a very important role, which allegedly in the USA about 3 million people are said to have insisted, impregnated, and maltreated with Operation Scars and painting, etc.
Which of course is sheer nonsense and has no reality at all. We are well aware of the hysteria of such delusions in America. This is already spreading to Europe, with a particularly fertile soil to be found especially in Germany. On the other hand, the delusion and the hysteria are still consciously stirred up from different places, whereby also this Falcon appears, whose false information is taken by all stupid believers gladly as cash coin. Certain official bodies, offices, and organizations also deliberately allow such false information to be disseminated, whereby the reasons for this are very varied. I am not yet allowed to speak openly about this, nor about which things correspond to the truth or untruth in matters of UFO crashes and UFO salvages, as well as other related matters. Also, with regard to the clarification of earthly offices and military and defensive forces in matters of UFOs, my duty of secrecy, which is apparent from one of our directives, is that we must not interfere in any matters of human life with which we are not in official contact. So, we must also keep in mind that we must not decipher secrets that are kept by earthly authorities, government officials, security organizations, the military, etc. Which secrets Earth authorities and military as well as security organizations guard, etc., regarding interests of allegedly extraterrestrial aircraft and humans, etc., must remain according to our directive instructions their secrets, which we do not have the right to air.
Well, that's clear. So I don't want to ask you any more about these things. From your explanation, it should be very clear, however, that the Scandinavian aviation major Peterson is also a fantasist in matters concerning the fact that extraterrestrials are supposed to hold important offices in the most diverse earthly governments.
We have also talked about this on several occasions, but we have always made it clear that such assertions correspond to nothing other than pure delusional fantasies.
Contact Report 249.
What about the fact that UFO sightings are made all over the world again and again? They cannot all be real.
That is right, but we have talked about it a lot. Very few percentages correspond to actual sightings. The rest is based on sensory illusions, charlatanism, dizziness, lies and deception, etc.
It is always doubted that Pleiadic spaceships can fly with umpteen times the speed of light in normal space, or that objects can only fly through space with approximately the speed of light without time shifts, because Einstein's theory of relativity simply forbids this. Is the assumption correct that the calculation formulas of this theory of relativity are basically correct, but only with limitations, so that they have to be replaced by other and further additions in the end? In my opinion, this should be the case, because if I consider that certain galaxies drift apart at approximately the speed of light, without time shifts arising, then it would have to be so for this reason alone, quite apart from my own experience, which I was allowed to experience and make through you during my great journey and during other occasions.
Your assumption is absolutely correct, but I am not allowed to give any official details about it and therefore no information. The actual facts and formulas must remain a secret for the Earth humans for a long time to come, for everyone.
All the nonsense that is told and spread about UFOs and extraterrestrials on Earth has spread like a festering ulcer, whereby also the actual UFO sightings and observations are denigrated and referred to the realm of fantasy and delusions of the senses.
That is indeed so.
Contact Report 250.
Can you officially explain how things are to be seen in relation to UFOs with regard to their origin? I am referring to the fact that unidentified flying objects do not only come from our space-time continuum, but also from other dimensions. We have never really talked about this in detail, but mostly only superficially and in passing.
That is right. So, I want to give some information about it in a little more detail than usual. Let's start with the unidentified aircrafts or missiles, etc., which are purely terrestrial human constructions. This kind of missile exists a larger number in different forms. These are productions of the most diverse states of Earth, which, however, keep their researches and products secret. Of course, they cannot avoid doing test flights, etc., with their flying machines, whereby they can often be observed by terrestrial people of all social classes, thus by simple citizens as well as by well-known title holders, etc. Some of these constructions have flight abilities that go far beyond the normal understanding of terrestrial humans and mock the normal aircraft construction as well as the normal flight abilities of the normal terrestrial airplanes. These missiles also have forms that do not correspond to those of known airplanes, which is why they appear strange. For these reasons, when observed by the uninitiated, they are not recognized as earthly constructions and are consequently referred to as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. However, this also includes observations which have no connection whatsoever with such objects, but which can be traced back to cloud formations as well as swarms of insects or birds, or to natural atmospherical or gaseous luminous phenomena, etc. Also undersea gas escapes, which cause the water to bubble at the sea surface, as well as sensory illusions and balloons, kites, zeppelins, normal airplanes or light and ultralight airplanes, etc. belong to it. With all these things, which appear very frequently, it should be absolutely clear that they are not interplanetary flying objects, and thus not unidentified flying objects of extraterrestrial human life forms. If we consider a further form of terrestrial flying objects, which are considered UFOs and which are not of extraterrestrial origin, then we have to speak of those flying machines which originate from the terrestrial future in terms of their dimensions to the space-time continuum prevailing here. So we are dealing here with flying bodies of earthly origin, but built in a dimension of the future on Earth, whereby Earth humans living there in the future have found the ways of time travel, whereby it becomes possible for them to travel back into their own past and thus also into the present time on Earth. So these visitors are not extraterrestrial intelligences either, but also inhabitants of Earth, whose technology is many centuries and sometimes even thousands of years ahead of the present time of Earth humans and in the future. Further forms of unidentified flying bodies concern life forms that are actually extraterrestrial and that also belong to this space-time continuum prevailing here. Such life forms with their flying objects visit Earth only very rarely, except for 3 different races, which have been flying to Earth for a long time, apart from us Pleiadians, of course. Furthermore, Earth is also approached here and there by extraterrestrial human life forms, which happens, however, extremely rarely and is to be counted often in decades or in centuries, who come with their flying objects from parallel spaces and/or from parallel planes to the space-time continuum predominant here. Like, for example, we ourselves, who live in a parallel space, which is shifted, fractions of a second, attached to this space-time continuum predominant here.
Sorry to interrupt. On the one hand, you talked about Earthlings who live in the future and visit Earth from there. That's what you call time travelers.
Of course.
But what should we call those who simply come from parallel spaces?
According to your sense, we simply call it transfer or parallel transfer.
So nothing that would be complicated to say. But just go on with your explanations now. Does it actually happen frequently that people with their flying machines come to us from parallel spaces and come to Earth?
No, that's very rare, apart from us and our allies. In contrast, however, it is more common for bioorganic flying objects, sea rods to appear in this space-time continuum, not only on Earth, but also on many other inhabited and uninhabitable world spheres. So we can observe such bioorganisms, as we call them, also on our worlds, whereby we do not know, however, yet exactly which kind these life forms are now. The dimension changers, as we also call them, are larger and smaller airworthy bioorganic life forms, which are often fluorescent or very brightly radiating and located in a parallel space or parallel universe. In their way, they are absolutely harmless and even playful. They often appear individually or in smaller groups, ranging in size from a few meters to several hundred meters in diameter. They live in a parallel space that we have not yet been able to access, whose data we know well, but into which we have not yet been able to penetrate in form in order to establish communicative contact with these forms of life. It is about the same with the malicious skrills, with which we can hardly communicate, but which are not flying objects like the dimension changers, but which can only move on solid ground and live in a parallel space. Finally, only those extraterrestrial intelligences are to be mentioned who come from the DIL universe and visit Earth. However, this is so rare that this was only the case once during the last 50,000 years, when Ascot maintained contact with you for 11 years.
Contact Report 251.
To justify you, I may speak officially today about it, and give the facts of the fact that we have analyzed and evaluated in a special way the film and photo montages, as well as the film trick shots of all false and fraudulent, alleged contact persons or UFO observers, and found out that their faked film and photo material found approval with the terrestrial people, particularly with so-called UFO specialists, who call themselves ufologists, etc., to which also well-known scientists belong. The ridiculousness of the forgeries and the believers in them is striking, but they were extremely effective. This was the reason for us to perform maneuvering movements with the real existence of our flying apparatuses, such as jerky pendulum movements and certain springy hovering movements, which normally do not correspond to the normal movements and flying techniques of our flying objects, but to the ridiculous jerky pendulum movements and peculiar swinging waves of the manipulated films and photos of the UFO swindlers and liars and charlatans. And the reason why we chose this type of movement lies in the fact that it was precisely this that triggered the worldwide and fierce UFO controversy, which of course also had many disadvantages for you, because you were accused of swindling and deceit or charlatanry and dishonesty, and assumed that you made models and photographed and filmed them. We often felt sorry for you because of this, but we could not change everything, because only by carrying out certain flight maneuvers in this form, which you could film and photograph and then spread all over the world, the worldwide UFO controversy was guaranteed, which led to the already said result, and will also in the future still further and already urgently necessary results bring. Another very objectionable factor is also that flying apparatuses are being built and tested in the USA by the military in an extremely secret manner, of which many outsiders nevertheless have knowledge and even evidence, because they have been able to observe and even film and photograph the flying apparatuses at all times of the day and night.
And these are flying apparatuses that have foreign forms and have propulsion systems and flight characteristics that are not inherent to any conventional aircraft.
I can now also say that various so-called UFO observations that have been made in many countries of the Earth during the last 4 decades can also be traced back in several forms to such flying apparatuses of terrestrial origin, which, however, do not only relate to America, but also to other countries of the Earth.
In various countries on Earth, flying apparatuses are being developed which, due to their construction method, which is different from that based on airplanes, appear foreign and extraterrestrial, and indeed with quite good success. The forms of flying apparatuses range from the beam-ship forms that you know of, to triangular forms, etc., etc. And the fact that these flying apparatuses are then regarded by observers as UFOs, that is to say as spaceships, or simply as extraterrestrial flying objects, is indeed probably only natural, not least also because they are noiseless, or almost noiseless, and have flight characteristics which are foreign to the flight techniques known on Earth and contradict them. There are many more pictures that have been taken in recent years by observers of UFOs that are real. According to your own statements, these include photos of police and military personnel.
That is correct, because during the last decades, different extraterrestrial intelligences have been seen on Earth with their flying machines, which could then also be filmed and photographed. The film and photo material of UFOs made in all the years worldwide, and especially in America and South America, as well as in England, etc., does not always show extraterrestrial flying objects, but also such strangely working flying machines, which are manufactured since several decades by terrestrial humans on Earth, as well as flying bodies, which come from the terrestrial future or which are known as bioorganic flying bodies with us, which are the so-called dimension changers, life forms, which penetrate from another dimension into the terrestrial airspace. In the time to come, even farther away, a lot will happen and change with regard to alien aircraft and their crews, but also with regard to earthly, mysterious, and strange-looking flying machines. Also, contacts with extraterrestrials are to be expected, which will be, however, of a completely different nature than all previous lying, swindling, and deceitful would-be contactees have presented them with all their religious, sectarian nonsense, etc.
Your world monitoring control discs, what about them? Do they remain stationed around the world?
All these control apparatuses have already been removed, so only the one intended for the center still exists. But it is no larger than 7 millimeters in diameter and 3.2 millimeters in thickness.
And that includes all the monitoring electronics as well as the signal transmitter?
And even much more you wouldn't dream of, as you like to say. The control apparatus also contains transmitters and receivers and associated image transmission equipment, which transmit everything at multiple speeds of light to a control point near our dimensional passage at a star far beyond the Pleiades cluster, in order to reach our space-time structure, and thus our dimension from there through a dimensional transmitter.
Contact Report 252.
During the last conversation, you told me confidentially that despite your departure, a patrol might still return.
That's right. Such a decision was indeed made. There are also already several unmanned and two-manned units here again, which carry out their observation flights and tasks around the planet.
Contact Report 257.
There are the underhand American efforts to cover up everything concerning UFOs and extraterrestrials and secretly use them for military armament, as well as for the exercise of military and political power. Besides you Pleiades and the members of your Federation, there are also other alien beings visiting our world, whose aircraft can be observed here and there.
That is correct, but not our concern, because we do not maintain any contacts to these very rare aliens, just as we do not maintain any contacts to Earth humans.
Extraterrestrials. In every case, caution is recommended in relation to the extraterrestrials, and contact with them as well as in relation to the observed UFOs, because for a long time not all of that which was said and asserted in this regard was correct. Deceptions can be present during the observations of UFOs, as well as the actual observation of extraterrestrial flying devices, etc. Thus, where dealing with such an observation, it is often very difficult to clear up. Yet it may be accepted that a certain small percentage of all observations actually lead back to extraterrestrial flying devices, which are seen in ever greater numbers around the world. The majority of the observations do not, however, correspond to reality, rather touch upon imaginations and such like, that many times are only the consequence of certain science fiction films, etc., that would arouse the susceptible humans to fantasies through which they then see or experience imaginary things in the sky that have nothing to do with reality. And just these imaginations, that often extend to real vision, are very plentiful, but this should not prejudice the facts, and mean that all observations are of this kind, because there actually are still enough cases of UFO observations that undoubtedly rest upon such really occurring extraterrestrial, and partly also other dimensional flying devices which have nothing to do with the Pleiadian Pleiaren and their confederates, rather they belong to other worlds and civilizations. Therefore, the greatest caution is recommended with extraterrestrial contacts in the sky, because too much about this are lies, deception, swindle, charlatanism and speculation, etc., whereby also the truth-despising efforts and falsifications as well as disinformation machinations of the governments are implicated through the committal and establishment of unbelievable lies, slanders, falsifications, and trickeries in the world to veil the truth, to contradict and to deny. The Roswell UFO crash is just one of many inglorious examples. Naturally, not all terrestrial governments and military work in this slimy way, but there are many. And they get ever more difficulty from those peoples who are really interested in the UFO clarification and the events connected therewith, as they turn the heat up under the governments, the military, and the secret services. The time, namely, presses ever more, because ever more UFO incidents take place, and also pure UFO observations increase ever further. So the responsible ones use their lies, defamation, and denial ever less, whereby they apply a new obscuring technique to keep secret the actual existence of extraterrestrials, as well as their visits to Earth. Their new method is to demonize everything that has to do with UFOs and extraterrestrials. That, thereby, also serves to hinder the coming about of contact with extraterrestrials and civilians, because that can no longer be controlled and because, as a rule, civilians who are not bound by a military or secret service security status do not shy away from making such experiences and events openly known. But such open information is exceedingly uncomfortable and even exceedingly dangerous for the governments, as well as for the military and secret services, etc., as their power structures could become shaky. Of this, it was already clear to a whole lineup of authorities, as well as their military and secret services in the First World War because, over the battlefields of Europe, UFOs were observed whose appearance was, however, kept secret. It went the same way in the Second World War, as the Foo Fighters surfaced everywhere. Indeed, it was already firmly established by the military and secret services and highest government positions by the First and Second World Wars that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin, yet the secrecy was still maintained. The facts of the extraterrestrial origins of flying devices was recognized in America, through the observation of a landing of such an object, where 4 unusually clothed humanoid beings disembarked, collected some plants in the vicinity, re-entered their device, and flew away. The observers of these events were 2 members of the military who, coincidentally, were in just that area while on vacation. Both reported the event to the nearest military facility, allowing the secret investigations and clarifications to proceed, as had already happened in other similar cases that preceded, and also subsequently occurred even more. But everything happened under the strictest non-disclosure. As the Pleiadian Pleiaren have affirmed, so the public received no knowledge about these incidents whatsoever, as neither did the main body of the governments, the military, and the secret services. It was always only the very highest positions and officials who were privy to the secrets. And it was also these people who even then concerned themselves with, and worked out, concealment tactics to deceive most of their subordinates and the entire population. It was to be avoided that on one hand everything would be known, and on the other hand that those not in the know and not sworn to secrecy or even civilian personnel could have contact with extraterrestrials. Therefore, a possibility was sought to place fear in humans in relation to the extraterrestrials, so that no contact would result from a possible landing, or from a crash of extraterrestrial projectiles. Naturally, already in those times there were civilian observers of UFOs. But if this was to be avoided, there would still be fundamentally nothing given recognition in the open media. They also led the population to believe that these strange flying devices were their own secret flying machines, which were just then undergoing initial testing. Therefore, the people already at that time were knowingly being led into the dark. Silence was maintained regarding what the UFOs effectively were, namely extraterrestrial and partly foreign dimensional interplanetary flying devices controlled by crews foreign to Earth. Naturally, in those days, the flying devices were not yet called UFOs, but were given other names. But that doesn't diminish the fact that already after the outbreak of the First World War, in 1915, the American President Woodrow Wilson ordered a non-disclosure in respect of extraterrestrial flying objects and decreed measures to cover himself with what had been written. The consequences of this unofficial, secret edict, of which also U.S. Presidents Warren G. Harding as well as Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover and Franklin D. Roosevelt, whereby especially Roosevelt, were finally the driving power, was that the angst for extraterrestrial conquerors would be incited to panic, and indeed, through a perfidious machination, together with the Secret Service, through which book authors would be threatened with death in order to start an extremely effective horror scenario. U.S. President Harry Truman was then also later drawn into the conspiracy, because he even cooperated as the highest-placed observer of UFO crash sites. However, things of this kind were not only happening in America, because also in Russia, as also in other countries, one was becoming attentive to the UFOs and secretly held the view that it must concern extraterrestrial flying devices, even when, always again, meanwhile, voices from the uninitiated grew loud in Russia, as well as in America, that these thereby dealt with new kinds of enemy aircraft. Party leader and dictator Joseph W. Stalin was, for example, like various U.S. presidents, at different times an observer of UFOs, from which he was quickly convinced, despite the angst for the new flying machines of the Americans, that it dealt with intelligences foreign to Earth. One fact that he, however, never made openly known, as also happened with the fact that practically every UFO observation in the Soviet Union fell under secrecy provisions. The darkening, slandering and obscuring machinations of many governments, militaries and secret services, etc., of different countries, began therefore already very early, and indeed much earlier than would be generally accepted by the real UFO researchers. According to the explanation of the Pleiadian Pleiaren, however, especially the Americans were leading in this respect, whereby these were also those who held the proof of the existence of extraterrestrial flying objects tight in their hands already early, and indeed not first since the Roswell case. Truly, already earlier, the Americans had parts of wreckage from crashed extraterrestrial flying devices fall into their hands, as well as mutilated extraterrestrial corpses, which, however, fell under the strictest non-disclosure and whereby, as the Plejadian Pleiaren explained, also undesired UFO crash and UFO recovery observers, as well as recovery workers were erased or forced into silence under the gravest threats. But that was not enough by far, because the longer the UFO appearances in the New Age were observed, the more secretively these were dealt with, and indeed not the least on that account, because the arrival of the extraterrestrials and the enslavement of the terrestrial humanity through the invaders was feared by the American government and their military as well as secret services. And so, that the population should be left in ignorance about the truth of the existence of extraterrestrials. Nevertheless, however, that fear must be developed in the peoples against the extraterrestrials, out of which a far-reaching hate must be established against the invaders, and, thereby, once again a defensive rage steered by hate should result. The U.S. presidency, as well as the leading officers of the military and the secret services, etc., came upon a psychologically sophisticated idea to work out a horror scenario in extraterrestrial matters, and to start it in such a way that not only America would be seized by it, rather also great parts of the rest of the world. This scenario should be configured in such a way that once angst and panic should first break out regarding extraterrestrial invaders, thereafter they then spread further fear and hate far, and could spread it over the world, and indeed also then, when it would be officially recognized that it all only dealt with fiction and therefore a poor utopian piece of work. Thereby the psychological trick would be established, that when once fear is sown, then from that yet greater fear, and finally also panic and hate must develop. That follows itself further, always spreading out farther. A fact that was already known then and also today, yet would be practiced again and again over the whole world in different relationships. And exactly angst and terror were necessary, according to the view of the responsible ones, to incite the population against the extraterrestrials, and to prevent them from coming into contact with them if the opportunity should present itself. Through this perfidious and fully thought-out psychological machination of the highest government authorities as well as the military and secret services, it also should be avoided that at any time, any one of the people would gain admission to the extraterrestrials if the opportunity offered itself. The responsible ones not only had fear of a peaceful extraterrestrial official or unofficial landing and contact initiative, but they also feared an invasion. And because an official or unofficial extraterrestrial appearance and effect on the Earth was not compatible with the religious philosophies, since 1915, Pope Benedict XV, 1914, to 1922, as well as Pius V, 1922, to 1939, and Pius XV, 1939 to 1958, would also be drawn into the entire conspiracy. Also, certain Jewish dignitaries were enlisted in this, who even at that time in America had quite a bit to say and had a voice. In the most secret of missions, it was therefore resolved to create a horror scenario which would agitate the population on one hand, who, however, should be left in ignorance of the truth of the existence of the extraterrestrials who already maneuvered in terrestrial airspace and also landed sporadically on the Earth, as it has been established from secure sources, and through that, on the other hand, that fear and hate be sown against the strangers from other worlds. The mean and slimy trick was in and of itself simple. A radio broadcast should be transmitted, that on one hand spreads angst and terror of the extraterrestrials, and on the other hand, should also strike very far, and as much as possible, worldwide circles. To this end, through American Secret Service agents, as well as through the responsible superiors of these positions of duty, as well as the government and militarily, suitable authors and works were sought, which could be exploited and used for the perfidious machination. It was U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, President, 4th March 1933, 12th April 1945, who quite personally, however, sought out the science fiction work of Englishman Herbert George Wells, who as an author in 1898 brought out a work under the title War of the Worlds. In this episode, American Secret Service agents made contact with Wells and beseeched him coercively to adapt his work to a radio play. But the man himself did not feel in a position to do this, so he suggested chartering a young American author of his acquaintance, Orson Welles, who would certainly be suitable. Under threats of death, H.G. Wells was obliged to lifelong silence, after which, then in America, the still young Orson Welles would be coerced by the Secret Service people to refashion H.G. Wells's work, War of the Worlds, into a realistic-seeming horror radio play. Out of the science fiction novel Wells wrote in 1897 and published in 1898, such a work that broadcast on the radio would release wild panic and angst as well as hate for the extraterrestrials. The work, in which extraterrestrials, formed unlike humans, and of monstrous and evil nature, land on the earth and cause trouble and destruction, was exactly that which had been hoped for by the responsible ones of governments, the military, and the secret services. It's no wonder that as a result of panic breaking out, there was quite a number of dead. The goal of the government, the military, and the secret services was achieved with the broadcast of the radio play War of the Worlds, because from then on fear, and also a certain hate, ruled against the extraterrestrials of the kind and form, as well as the sense, that was also always desired. And exactly that has remained that way until today, and even still spreads out, because fear and hate would again always be newly stirred up, and the American Secret Service powers, etc., are especially proficient in doing exactly that. Were that not enough? That they, and certain also determined government and military powers, financially support and demand contrafilms against the extraterrestrials? No, they do not shy from simulating all kinds of horror events like, for example, abductions by extraterrestrials, as well as human and animal mutilations and so on and so forth. They are also not inactive in matters relating to the falsification of crop circles, and indeed in the most differing countries. Naturally, in respect of all these things, there are also charlatans, deceivers and swindlers and every other sort, yet the Secret Service machinations are probably indeed the worst, because it is precisely through these that disinformation is established, through which the genuine and actual events in this regard are bedeviled and made laughable. Scarcely anything is known about exactly this, as everything runs so secretly as it always has, and as does the actual story of the radio play of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles. And the danger exists that something could not be held secret. Then the responsible ones of the government and military as well as the secret services do not shy away from bringing the witnesses to silence under death threats or through an otherwise erasing, like for example through elimination or through a consciousness-stupefying brainwash and psycho-terror and so forth. Herbert George Wells, who died on the 13th August 1946, also knew that, as did Orson Welles, who departed this life on October 10th, 1985. Neither left behind any indications about the true incidents regarding the radio play, as they correctly feared that their families, friends and acquaintances after their demise also could be vengefully persecuted by the Secret Service people and the responsible ones of the government and military. And that I now do not hold my tongue about that which the Pleiadian Pleiaren explained to me in regard to this. What comes of that remains to be seen. The nasty machinations of the government, military and secret service people in respect of the demonizing of extraterrestrials have increased ever more since 1938, indeed slowly and successively. Thus, however, all the more incessantly and expansively, until in the 80s, essentially, the greatest machination for the bedevilment of extraterrestrials began, through a shifty structure in the fashion of the Secret Service, as well as miscellaneous UFO and extraterrestrial enemies. Stories came about like the ghastly human and animal mutilations, the theft of human babies, and the impregnating of terrestrial women through foreign visitors out of outer space. Horror stories were also disseminated about subterranean laboratories and the inhuman experiments taking place there. Were that still not enough? Because the angst of the extraterrestrials wreaked even worse blooms. Like, for example, it would be asserted that women impregnated by aliens would, after some months, have the baby growing in the womb snatched out to be allowed to finally grow further in a fluid-filled incubator, etc., in order to breed up a new humanity, etc., using these hybrid children. A further horror story was that the Earth humans would be abducted in order to take their genetic material that would be necessary for the extraterrestrials' further breeding of humans, who would serve as, so to say, nourishment providers, because the evil foreigners, out of the depths of outer space, supposedly nourish themselves on human blood. Similarly, it would also be asserted in respect to the animal mutilations in America, whereby the related far-fetched feeble-mindedness that namely beef blood demonstrates a genetic relationship with human blood. Therefore, the mutilated cattle would have their blood sucked out to store in the blood banks for crisis times, naturally through the evil extraterrestrials. Yet even that is not enough, because still many other assertions, slanderings and lies, and clearly to be recognized as feeble-minded, are put about, through which the humans are led into error, and would be shifted into angst and terror, as has had manifold success, and certain mass hysteria has been released by a worldwide group of certain Earth humans, which also leads to feelings of hate, etc.
Contact Report 260.
Here, for example, protective shields of spaceships. As you know, science fiction films are broadcast almost all over the world by all TV stations, even in the cinemas. These are shown, and of course, as a rule, the aliens are always the bad guys who kill the Earth humans, and who want to destroy the Earth or else want to conquer and colonize it for themselves, which is, of course, pure nonsense. Now, in these films, it is regularly portrayed that the energy shields of the spaceships lose a percentage of strength and protective function each time when energies of any kind hit these. These other foreign energies are, of course, generally those that are shot, emitted from hostile beam weapons of enemy objects. Now, the question is, to what extent can such an energy shield be reconstructed in a decisive time, such that a full protection is given again? There actually are such protective shields, as I know from you. Therefore, what is depicted in the films doesn't just correspond to an unattainable fantasy. And as you once explained to me, our earthly scientists are also working on such protective shields, even though everything still falls under secrecy.
And successes in relation to this could have already been seen if it didn't just concern secret projects. But I can answer your question as follows. It all depends on what energy sources are used for a protective shield, in what measures they are used, and how they can be brought to application. As you know very well, energies are not simply energies, but this doesn't actually have to be explained in detail. Therefore, it is only to be said that in general, different technologies for the utilization of protective shields exhibit different forms of energy, from which energy shields can even be generated. The protective shields themselves can also be very different, so they might protect a spaceship or other aircraft, etc., only by sector or even completely. With this, it should be explained that a spaceship, another aircraft, a human, a robot or android or something else can just be protected by a single, full-scale protective shield, or by one that consists of several segments. That is to say, sectors. A full-scale protective shield has a main energy source and a reserve energy source, while a segment shield, that is to say, sector shield, has its own main energy source and reserve energy source for each sector. Thus, the individual sectors are independent of each other.
And what form of energy shield is used by you?
We exclusively use comprehensive protective shields, and to be sure, for the spaceships and other aircraft as well as for humans and all things that must be protected in this way. However, our energy shields don't work in the way as portrayed in your science fiction films, namely that the protective shields are weakened when foreign energies from beam weapons or from cosmic energy fields, that is to say, shocks of energy, impact on the shields. By what means these become weakened in their capacity, that is to say, performance. This form of protective shield development only represents an initial one, and we already left this phase behind us thousands of years ago. Already more than 40,000 years ago, our technology in this regard experienced such a high development that the protective shields could be perfected and could be put into use, whereby these shields were designed in such a way that any kind of energy that hit them became converted into that which was useful for the shield, which has so remained up to this day. Thus, by impacts of foreign energies of every kind, including, of course, protective shield-conforming energies, the protective shields are neither weakened nor destroyed. Rather, they convert the impacting energy immediately and without loss of time into their own energy, and thus strengthen the power of their own shields. In other words, there occurs, without loss of time, an energy to standardization in the protective shield's energy, whereby this accumulates with each newly added burst of energy of any kind from beam weapons or cosmic energy. This means that the more the energy hits the protective shields, the stronger these become.
And it doesn't matter what form of energy hits the protective shield, because it automatically converts all energy hitting it of every kind and makes it useful for itself.
Yes, I said that.
Here I now have a question in reference to the navigation technology of your spaceships and other missiles or robots and machines, etc. Everything is equipped with feeling circuits which work just like futuristic armatures and switchgears. It only very rarely happens, however, that you carry out any manipulations with these, even though everything is geared toward the fact that, absolutely, a manual operation can take place. As you've explained to me but also often demonstrated, all navigation manipulations occur through pure thought impulses.
That is correct.
You explained to me that with you, no spaceship technology or other missile technology exists that isn't navigated by thought impulses, even though everything also always allows a manual navigation.
As I already said, that is correct.
Contact Report 269.
Then again a question. The unknown flying objects, the so-called UFOs, which are sighted more and more frequently in all countries, sometimes even in larger arrangements, and which are also sighted in larger numbers, all concern the same place of origin.
No, that is not the case, because there are several different places of origin from where the flying objects come. Besides, not all are at home in your space-time structure, because as we noticed, Earth is also visited by differently dimensioned flying objects and beings that do not come from your space-time structure.
Can one also speak of future visitors?
Yes, that is the case.
Contact Report 272. A note. The following comments concern a photograph seen here along with an enlargement in Contact Report 272.
I remember this very well, because Florina and I were flying in your airspace at the time, because we were observing foreign flying apparatuses that were also flying around in your immediate and wider airspace. Like ourselves, they were shielded from any view to humans from Earth, so neither these foreigners nor ourselves could be observed. Our advanced technology also allowed us to remain invisible to the foreigners, so they had no idea of our presence. But if our flying apparatus is still visible in the picture you mentioned, then this could only be captured on film for a tiny fraction of a second, at a moment when the automatic safety system changed the frequency of the visual protection shield. A process that can become necessary when foreign objects, for which you want to remain invisible and unlocatable, get too close. However, if the flying apparatus becomes visible for a tiny fraction of a second during such an operation, this only happens on the side facing away from the foreign object, which ensures that our flying apparatus cannot be seen or located. But if our flying apparatus was photographed by the person you mentioned, then this corresponds to an almost unbelievable luck and a coincidence that occurs only once among millions of similar cases, when the automatic visual protection switch is delayed for a fraction of a second.
Legendary and the foreigners? What kind of beam ships or flying apparatus do they have, and what do they want?
Their flying apparatuses bears a certain resemblance to ours and could therefore easily be confused by the uninitiated and ignorant. What the foreigners want is easy to explain. They appear once every 70 to 80 years on Earth, taking care of all sorts of things that reach into political as well as military and scientific matters, whereby their aim is to make an official appearance at the appropriate moment and to establish open contact with the Earth humans.
And were there contacts to them at earlier times? That is to say, did these foreigners interfere in the earlier concerns of Earth humans?
That was to some extent the case, yes.
This is undoubtedly our flying apparatus, with which Ptah and I were traveling in your area on the 9th of May at 13 Date Chartiers. However, we did not use the flying apparatus that I usually use, but one that is probably ordered for our duties, but is not assigned to our technology and therefore has some external modifications.
But you can still think of it as a Pleiadian-Pleiaren ship. At least I thought of it as such.
The confusion is understandable, as there are also various similarities with this flying apparatus that are deceptively similar to our technology.
Contact Report 273.
But don't you think it is a bit dangerous to park your ship here in the parking lot? Maybe somebody will come by at this time.
If someone should come unexpectedly, then the automatic switch of the aircraft turns on the sight protection. Therefore, it cannot be seen then. For this purpose, a safety screen is in function.
Florina, do you have any knowledge worth knowing about the aliens you and Ptah observed in the airspace around Schmidruti on the 8th of May 1998?
I am not allowed to give details of important nature. However, I may say that these strangers are very often present in your airspace. We do not know the reason for this, but we have our assumptions.
Contact Report 275.
Florina showed herself to Edith with all our consent, and then we found out that there was a lot of good news both in Edith and in various other group members. That's why we gave in to Tauron's request when he asked if he could openly and visibly move across the center, which he did on the night of the 28th of May of this year. And again we noticed that it was good and that visibly fruitful changes were taking place in different group members. So I approached the High Council and presented them with the statements they had made, whereupon they were advised to lift our privacy shield at certain moments if this appeared to be justifiable. The condition, however, is that only one sight wedge remains open at a time, pointing to the observer or observers or to a camera. If one or perhaps several of our flying apparatuses can be observed from the center, then this is only possible from this location, as a result of which it can no longer be sighted in the wider surroundings. But like you, I would also like to say that the structure here on the computer images, RC photo, is indeed a flying apparatus and that it belongs to the foreigners.
Contact Report 282.
But now I have a question about the control discs that curled around the center on the 19th of August 1989. What was the reason for this, if one is allowed to experience it?
That's no secret either. In fact, everything that was happening around the center and in its buildings was recorded visually and acoustically by the devices.
Ah, why is that?
That's no secret either. What was held was used for demonstration and information purposes for all our Federation members.
I am flat. By all Federation members, do you really mean all humanities or just spiritual leaders? The latter would not be logical, because you speak of all members of the Federation.
You already understand it correctly. The meaning of my words refers to all members of the Federation.
Then I am reassured when only 120 billion, 120,000 humans from foreign solar systems and planets know what's going on in the center, how the group members behave here, what they do and work, and what their interests are, etc. I am not sure what I mean. How many hours did the control discs, or telemetric discs as we call them, record everything?
Contact Report 287.
But may I still ask if you may tell me how many types of beam ships you have alternately in operation here on Earth? Or is that secret?
That is not subject to secrecy. We operate in earthly space with 76 different types of aircraft.
And are they all of purely Pleiadian origin? Or do you also have ship types that you use, that come from other Federation peoples, etc.?
A certain number of the types of aircrafts that we use on Earth concern their development and construction to other peoples of our Federation. They are therefore not of Pleiadian origin.
Say, do you fly different ships alternately? At least that's how it seems to me.
Yes, we don't always use the same flying objects, but this is not the rule.
Contact Report 289.
Now I have a question regarding your technology. In your spaceships, in your giant spaceship as well as in the beam ships, etc., you have an enormous amount of flat touch surfaces, which we simply call buttons here, and which serve to control and regulate and check, etc. Your ships and apparatuses as well as robots. Only rarely, and also on my great journey, have I seen you operate these flat touch buttons. But nevertheless everything has taken its course as you wished and said it would. Can you tell me the reason for this?
That is no secret. The flat contact surfaces, as you call them, are highly sensitive radiant surfaces that are not directly touched, but are only superficially aligned to pick up the swinging waves of the human beings via the fingertips who want to carry out the necessary manipulations. In reality, however, the radiant surfaces are only manual aids for very last emergencies, precisely when something should fail for some reason, which, however, is absolutely impossible. Nevertheless, safety and our legislation in this respect require that emergency switching must be possible. In the normal case, every flying apparatus, every spaceship, and every piece of equipment, etc., is put into operation and controlled, etc., by artificial bio-brains, which are biointelligences in themselves and can think and act independently, for which, however, they require a clear and direct thought impulse from a responsible and authorized human being. It is therefore impossible for unauthorized persons to get into the working and control systems of any beam ships, spaceships, devices, other missiles, or into apparatus or weapons and working tools, etc., because every single thing is aligned and therefore programmed to the responsible operator authorized to act. One exception was when you were piloting Simyase's flying object around the Earth.
So also no weapon can be used by an unauthorized person, as well as no devices, apparatus, and ships, etc.
That is the meaning of my words. All our technology requiring operation is set in operation and controlled, etc., solely by thought impulses of those in charge of operation. There is no other possibility, not even in the sense that something could be done by the manually operable radiant surfaces, because in this respect, too, the vibrations of the agents of action and operation are necessary.
Contact Report 291 Asina. The number of our ships with which we came into your time is 21.
Yes, it just amazes me that the lights were not shown on TV or in the newspapers, because the whole thing took a good 10 minutes and must have been seen by a lot of human beings.
The Earth humans are like that. They obviously consider such events to be of earthly origin. Thus, it will have been that the lighting up of the flying apparatuses from Asina's armada was interpreted as earthly aircraft.
Contact Report 292.
Well, you really surprised me when you showed up with Asina in my office. I did not expect her to be able to come here and that you would find her at all. Where were they and yours that you have not found them in so long?
After their materialization, they immediately left Earth, flying to Venus with some of the planes and to Mars with the rest of the planes to clarify and explore some things that were important to them. So of course we searched in vain for them in earthly space, especially because we have not hermetically controlled the Earth and its airspace since 1995, so that we are no longer orientated towards all the entries, etc. of extraterrestrial intelligences.
You already said that earlier, but you also mentioned that you had loosened your overall control since the mid-80s.
That's right, because since then there's no need for total control anymore.
Contact Report 301.
May I ask you, what's the situation with the new control disk you want to reinstall, as you finally told me? Do you already have it in operation?
This is the case.
Aha, and what performance does this thing achieve?
It's aligned with our latest ultra-subatomic computer technology.
I know a lot now. What performance does this thing achieve, and how big is it?
The size of the apparatus is 4 square millimeters with a total thickness of 1 millimeter. This mass also contains the entire processor apparatus as well as the transmitter and receiver, the power generating unit, and the dynamizer.
Dynamizer? What is that?
Is the name not correct? I mean the engine.
Aha, you can also call it that. An incredibly tiny mass, this control disk. How big is the storage capacity of the tiny one?
74 exabyte.
A bohemian forest for me. Exabyte, I have never heard or read that before. How can that be expressed in numbers?
You call an exabyte 1018.
Man, that's a trillion. 74 exabytes would then be 74 trillion bytes. And that's stored on such a tiny surface. Ultra-subatomic, you say?
Certainly.
And that generally corresponds to your highest current computer technology. Man, oh man. May I ask how many operations your high-performance computers are able to perform per second? High-performance computers? Nonsense. They certainly are not, if I judge your technology by what you just explained.
The operational speed of our fastest computers is 1052 operations per second.
And all this on an ultra-subatomic basis? That's super speed. And how big is a computer like that, and how much power does it need for operation?
I told you the size of the smallest, 4 square millimeters of surface area and 1 millimeter of thickness. The required operating power is 7 watts for a computer the size of a cubic meter, as it is in my generation aircraft.
You mean in your giant roomer?
Yes.
How much energy does the tiny control disk of only 4 square millimeters and only 1 millimeter thickness need?
The demand is in the nanoscale of a watt.
Contact Report 322.
But tell me, in relation to various unknown flying objects, UFOs, which have been appearing all over the world for decades, even at the present time, and whatever will be preserved for the future, are you allowed to say something about them if you do not touch the previous explanations?
You should also keep silent about this, because things could become apparent which again fall within the scope of our directives.
Of course, how can I? But what about the Earth future flying objects that are not related to your explanations?
We should not talk openly about that either, even if these issues do not affect our directives. The reason for this lies in the Earth future, from which the flying objects you mentioned come.
And what about bioorganic flying objects, rods, and the Skrill Sea Contact Report 238? Shouldn't we mention anything more about them in the future?
That would be advisable, yes. Everything is exuberant with regard to extraterrestrial flying objects and extraterrestrial human life forms in the terrestrial human being, whereby either fear and terror are stirred up or everything is ridiculed.
Contact Report 324.
Last night I received a telephone call from a woman in Munich and was asked whether I knew that in the night from the 6th to the 7th, that is from Saturday to Sunday, there was an impressive light phenomenon over Bavaria, and whether I knew what it was about. Do you know anything about this event? I promised the woman that I would ask you and then give her an answer when she calls me again the next weekend.
The incident is known to us, and there is nothing mysterious about it that needs to be concealed. In fact, it is true that two different events coincided which triggered the luminous phenomenon. The whole thing was about two objects crashing together towards the Earth and burning up due to the frictional heat caused the remarkable luminous phenomenon. One object was a natural one, a so-called bolide, an oversized shooting star, as you would say, or a small meteor, while the second object was an artificial one, namely a larger piece of space junk created by Earth humans. The coincidence was that the bolide raced exactly into the orbit of this space debris and dragged it with it, whereby both entered the atmosphere and together they burned up for the most part. Consequently, only small parts fell to Earth unburned.
Contact Report 328.
It's not worth thinking about it, because on the one hand, it's an invented mischievous story about the Mothman, just an owl's mirroring, as you once called this kind of activity. On the other hand, at that time a real hysteria arose regarding UFOs, according to which many people at that time saw many unreal things that really did not exist. So through hysteria they fell into hallucinations, self-generated real visions and strong imaginations. This hysteria was not limited to the United States of America, but spread all over the world. In fact, however, at that time some flying objects appeared which were unidentifiable for the terrestrial people, whereby of all of them only two were really of extraterrestrial origin, which belonged to our Federation and which could be observed several times. All other observations were undoubtedly due to terrestrial flying objects of partly secret form, or to any natural terrestrial phenomena, or they were based on illusions and self-deceptions, etc., whereby the self-deceptions were usually based on wishful thinking, which was aimed at seeing extraterrestrial flying objects, as it is still the case today in the vast majority of cases of UFO observations.
Contact Report 341.
Can you tell me how high above Earth our tiny control disk is floating?
The latest device is in a stationary orbit at an altitude of 867 kilometers, measured from the middle surface of the Earth.
Contact Report 343.
Why is it then that the glow of the ship or ships cannot be seen at all in the size as the ship is, or as the ships are? The light should appear much bigger, I think.
Of course, the glow extends over the whole aircraft, as you know from experience, since you could make your observations from very close range. But if the aircraft is more than 280 meters above the ground, then the entire light energy is automatically bundled in such a way that only a small area of visibility is created, which for observers at nighttime makes the aircraft appear only like a larger star. This technique is based on a safety measure against biased observers who think they see only one star. From this point of view, it is usually not noticed that the apparent star is moving.
Why biased observers?
Regarding our directives that we should not make ourselves noticeable and not openly make ourselves visible to human populations, which themselves are not yet capable of actual space travel and have not yet become really human.
Then you could completely shield yourselves so that no light from your ships can be seen at night. Your technology is so advanced that there should be no problems for you in this respect.
That would be possible for us, of course, but then we would have to shield our aircraft against any visibility, which brings the disadvantage for us that in this state of the aircraft, we can no longer perform certain locating activities.
You mean that if your ships are invisible to the human eye, as well as to radar beams, etc., then, if I understand correctly, certain tracking activities from the ships will be affected.
That is of correctness.
Contact Report 353.
When you come here for the visits or corrections, do you always come to the SOL system with your giant spaceship? I was asked about that.
No, because that is only necessary when I have special tasks to perform in this part of the Dern universe. Usually I come here with small flying machines that cannot be registered by the earthly observers and monitors.
So this brings up another question after all. Can't you shield your giant room from view?
Yes, but as a rule the giant space machine is used elsewhere, and my deputy is in command of it.